I woke to the scent of unfamiliar incense and the oppressive softness of silk beneath my fingers. At first, I thought I was dreaming until memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. I was no longer myself. I was Muan, a spoiled, careless son whose arrogance had ruined everything. And yet, in this borrowed life, I had a chance to change everything. To rewrite a story of failure into one of strength, family, and even love. This is the story of how I fought to reclaim a life I never thought I'd have. Don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Serenity BL for more tales like this. I woke to the scent of unfamiliar incense and the oppressive softness of silk beneath my fingers, the kind that clung to skin as if it had the right to own you. For a brief, merciful second, I thought I was dreaming until a sharp ache bloomed behind my eyes and memories that did not belong to me crashed in like a flood breaking a dam. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was carved wood, painted with fading clouds and cranes, elegant and old. This was not my apartment, this was not my life. And the moment I tried to sit up, my body betrayed me, weak and sluggish, as though it had never known honest work. Panic rose in my throat before a single name surfaced in my mind, heavy with dread, Muan. I knew this body, or rather, I knew what became of it. Muan was a name I had read with irritation and second-hand embarrassment, a spoiled side character in a BL novel set in an ancient imperial court. Lazy, cruel, entitled, his arrogance ruined his family and paved the way for his own miserable end. I remembered scoffing at his choices while reading, shaking my head at how easily some people destroy what they were given. Now I was trapped inside him, breathing through his lungs, staring through his eyes, and burdened with the consequences of his past. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't choking me. I forced myself upright, ignoring the way my arms trembled as if they had never lifted more than a porcelain cup. A mirror stood across the room, polished bronze catching the light. I stumbled toward it and froze. The face reflected back was pale and handsome in a delicate, careless way, smooth skin, long lashes, lips that curved naturally into arrogance. Muan's face. A face that had sneered at servants, mocked weakness, and driven wedges into every relationship it touched. My chest tightened as the last of my borrowed memories settled into place, each one a quiet accusation. This body had never earned its comfort, and if I followed the same path, it would drag me straight into ruin. I clenched my fists and took a breath, grounding myself in the only truth I could control. I was Aang, 26 years old. A chef who had survived long hours, burned fingers, and the relentless pressure of professional kitchens. I understood discipline, I understood effort, and I understood that survival often depended on adaptation. If fate had thrown me into Muan's body, then I would do what I had always done. I would learn the rules of this kitchen, this family, this court, and I would change the outcome, quietly, carefully, without drawing attention from the people who would benefit most from my failure. The door creaked open, and a young maid entered with a practiced bow, her eyes flicking up only briefly before settling back down. "Young master, you finally woke," she said. Relief and weariness tangled together in her voice. That hesitation told me more than words ever could. Mu was not missed when he slept, he was endured. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and nodded, forcing my expression into something neutral. When she asked if I needed anything, I surprised both of us by saying no. The word felt strange, but also powerful. Her eyes widened before she hurried out, whispering my name like it might bite her back. Later, when Mu Ruo burst into the room without knocking, her expression was sharp enough to cut. She looked me over as if searching for proof that I was still the brother she had learned not to trust. "You slept through half the morning," she said flatly. "Father is already angry." There was no concern in her tone, only tired expectation. I wanted to explain, to apologize for years of neglect that were not mine, but the weight of Muan's past pressed against my tongue. Instead, I bowed my head slightly. The movement alone drew her suspicion. "I'll speak to him," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She stared at me for a long moment, disbelief flickering across her face before she scoffed. "You?" she asked. "Since when?" I didn't answer. There were no words that could bridge the gap yet. When she left, shaking her head, I sank onto the bed and let the silence wrap around me. This was only the beginning. Repairing relationships broken over years would take time, patience, and restraint, 3 things Muan had never practiced. But I had, and I would start here, even if the first step was simply not making things worse. By midday, my body protested every attempt at movement. Walking across the courtyard left me breathless, my limbs aching as though they resented being used at all. I paused beneath a withered plum tree, sweat cooling against my skin, and laughed quietly at the absurdity of it. A chef reduced to panting after a short walk. Still, beneath the frustration, a spark of determination ignited. This weakness was not permanent. Bodies could be trained, habits could be rebuilt. And if Muen's downfall had begun with indulgence and idleness, then his salvation would begin with effort. It was there, in the open air, that another memory surfaced uninvited. Shen Rui, the name alone tightened something in my chest. He was the male lead of the novel, a man whose presence reshaped the fate of everyone around him. The original Muen had tormented him out of jealousy, blind to the danger of provoking someone destined to rise. I remembered scenes filled with cold gazes and quiet vengeance, remembered how Muen's cruelty had only hastened his own destruction. Avoid him, I told myself firmly. Whatever path Shen Rui walked now, I would stay far from it. Fate could not punish me for sins I refused to repeat. And yet, as if summoned by the thought, a distant voice drifted across the courtyard, calm, measured, unmistakably authoritative. I didn't need to see him to know who it was. Shen Rui's presence carried weight, even unseen. I turned away, heart pounding, and forced my legs to move despite their protest. This was not cowardice, it was strategy. Survival depended on knowing which flames to avoid. That evening, as I lay beneath embroidered blankets that felt undeserved, I stared at the shadows dancing across the ceiling and planned. Step by step, strengthen this body, earn Muru's trust, stabilize the family before its decline became irreversible, and above all, rewrite the story quietly enough that no one noticed the ink had changed. The Yunhai Court was not forgiving to those who stumbled, and I was walking a path already littered with Muen's mistakes. Sleep crept in slowly, heavy and uneasy. Just before my eyes closed, a thought settled in my mind. Unwelcome but persistent. Stories change when characters made different choices, but the world had a way of correcting what it deemed an error. If I had been given Muen's life as a second chance, then someone, somewhere, would eventually notice the difference. And when they did, I would need more than good intentions to survive what came next. Change, I learned quickly, was not something people accepted with grace. It unsettled them, made them suspicious, forced them to question what they thought they understood. Every morning, after that first awakening, I felt those questions pressing against me as I moved through the Mu residence. Servants paused when they saw me walking instead of lounging. Mu Ruo watched from doorways, her eyes sharp, measuring every breath I took. Even father's silence at the breakfast table carried weight, as though he were waiting for the inevitable moment when I would revert to the useless son he had already mourned. I let them watch. I let them doubt. If change was going to stick, it had to be consistent. My body fought me every step of the way. The muscles had taken for granted in my old life were absent here, replaced by softness and an alarming lack of stamina. I started small, rising before dawn to walk the perimeter of the courtyard, then forcing myself to repeat the circuit until my lungs burned. Sweat soaked through my robes, and more than once I had to grip the stone railing to keep from collapsing. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no sudden strength, only repetition, only persistence. Each day, I went a little farther. Each day, I refused to quit. It was humbling in a way Muen had never allowed himself to be. Mu Ruo noticed first. One morning, she appeared beside me without a word, matching her steps to mine as we walked beneath the pale sky. "You're serious," she said finally, not quite a question. I nodded, too focused on breathing evenly to offer anything more eloquent. She didn't smile, but the tension in her shoulders eased. When I stumbled near the end of the walk, she reached out without thinking and steadied me. We both froze at the contact, startled by how natural it felt. Then she laughed soft, surprised, and for the first time, I heard warmth in it. That laugh stayed with me all day, a quiet reminder that some things could still be repaired. It was after one of those mornings that I sought out Lindsay. The memories tied to his name sat like stones in my chest, heavy and unresolved. The original Muen had made him a target, mocking him publicly, humiliating him for no reason beyond insecurity. I found him near the outer garden, arranging medicinal herbs with careful hands. When he saw me approach, his posture stiffened, his expression closing like a door. I stopped a few steps away, resisting the urge to rush my words. Apologies meant nothing if they were hurried. "I owe you something," I said quietly. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "An apology," I continued, "not the kind meant to erase the past. Just the kind that admits it was wrong." For a moment, Lindsay said nothing, his fingers tightened around the bundle of herbs, knuckles whitening. Then he exhaled, slow and measured. "You don't change overnight," he said. "People like you never do." The words stung, but I accepted them. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air, "Mu Ruo," calling my name sharply. Lindsay glanced toward the sound, then back at me, something unreadable in his eyes. "If you truly mean it," he said softly, "prove it with time." Then he turned away, leaving me with the weight of what he had almost said pressing against my thoughts. At home, reality waited in the form of ledgers stacked neatly on Father's desk. I asked to review them, and the silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Father's gaze was skeptical, almost weary. "You've never cared for numbers," he said. "Why now?" I didn't tell him about another life, about a world where I had balanced costs and menus and payroll with aching feet and stubborn resolve. Instead, I said the truth that fit this world. Because our family can't afford not to, he allowed me the ledgers, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of resignation. The truth was worse than I expected: mismanaged funds, unpaid debts, wasted resources. The Mu family's decline wasn't sudden, it was bleeding slowly, unnoticed, until it became dangerous. As I traced the numbers, an idea formed, simple and stubborn as hunger. Food was constant. People could ignore many things, but they could not ignore an empty stomach. That night, I presented my proposal at the dinner table. A restaurant, a modest one, nothing extravagant, just honest food made well. Mu Ru's eyes lit with cautious interest. Father frowned, skeptical. Mother watched me with quiet hope, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They did not believe me until I cooked. I worked in silence, letting muscle memory guide my hands as I adapted familiar techniques to unfamiliar ingredients. When the dishes were served, the room filled with aroma, rich and comforting. Father took a bite, then another, his expression shifting despite himself. Mu Ruo smiled opally, pride flickering in her eyes. Mother's gaze softened, tears threatening as she nodded. The decision was made without ceremony. We would try. Failure was still possible, but for the first time in years, it would be earned. The storefront we rented was small, tucked along a busy street where merchants and laborers passed daily. I scrubbed floors until my back ached, rearranged the space until it breathed. Mu Ruo took charge of the front, her sharp tongue transforming into effortless charm. On opening day, my hands shook as I lit the hearth. I told myself it was just another kitchen, just another service, but my heart knew better. This was more than survival. This was redemption in the making. Customers came slowly at first, then in pairs, then in groups. They praised the food, returned with friends, spread words faster than any announcement ever could. By nightfall, exhaustion wrapped around me like a second skin, but beneath it pulsed something brighter, hope. As I closed the doors and leaned against the counter, Mu Ruo bumped my shoulder lightly. "You might actually pull this off," she said. Grinning, I laughed, breathless and sincere. Still, even in that warmth, unease lingered. Shen Rui had not appeared, but his absence felt deliberate, like the quiet before a storm. Lindsay's unfinished words echoed in my mind. Change demanded witnesses. And the Yunhai Court, I suspected, had begun to notice that Muin was no longer playing the role written for him. Fame, I learn it, did not arrive loudly. It crept in through whispers, through glances that lingered too long, through customers who bowed a little deeper each time they returned. By the time the imperial summons arrived, sealed in gold and crimson, I already knew something irreversible had begun. Bianwo stood in the center of our small restaurant, immaculate and unreadable, announcing that my skills had reached the ears of the Yunhai Court itself. I was to report to the inner royal kitchens within 3 days. Mu Ru's hand tightened around my sleeve, pride and fear warring in her eyes. Father said nothing for a long moment, then nodded once, as though fate had finally caught up to us. That night, sleep refused to come. The palace was not a place for naive ambition. It devoured talent and rewarded caution. I had read enough stories, lived one, even to understand that brilliance invited enemies. Still, refusing the summons was not an option. At dawn, I packed what little I could carry and stepped into a carriage that smelled faintly of lacquer and incense. As Jade Willow City disappeared behind us, I felt the weight of Muan's past tighten around my ribs. This was the point in the story where everything began to unravel. I would have to tread carefully if I wanted to rewrite what came next. The inner royal kitchens were nothing like I imagined. Instead of warmth and camaraderie, the air was sharp with tension, heavy with unspoken rules. Chefs moved like shadows, eyes downcast, hands precise. At the center stood Master Guo, his presence commanding without effort. His gaze lingered on me a second too long, assessing, calculating. "Talent is common," he said coolly. "Survival is not." I bowed deeply, hiding my unease. From the corner of my vision, I felt another presence, quiet, familiar, unsettling. Shen Rui. He stood near the doorway, dressed in dark robes that swallowed the light, his expression unreadable. When our eyes met, something shifted, subtle but undeniable. He did not greet me, he did not acknowledge me at all. And yet, I felt seen in a way that made my skin prickle. Memories of the original Muan's cruelty surfaced unbidden, and I forced myself to look away. Avoid him, I reminded myself. That resolve lasted exactly 3 days. My first assignment was simple enough: prepare a dish for a minor banquet. I worked with measured focus, blocking out the whispers, the deliberate bumps, the missing ingredients that reappeared only after I searched twice as hard. When the dish reached the emperor's table, silence followed, then laughter, approval. The emperor's praise was brief but genuine, and in that instant, I felt the atmosphere of the kitchen's tilt. Eyes sharpened, smiles thinned. Master Gu's expression remained unchanged, but the air around him grew colder. That night, I understood something crucial. Success here was not protection, it was provocation. The sabotage began subtly, knives dulled overnight. Ingredients spoiled inexplicably, instructions changed without warning. I adapted, improvising where I could, relying on instincts honed in another life. Shen Rui appeared often during those days, sometimes observing from a distance, sometimes speaking casually as if we were old acquaintances. "You've changed," he remarked once, his voice low. "Or perhaps you were always pretending." I couldn't tell if it was accusation or curiosity. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving my thoughts tangled and unsettled. The night everything broke, I was summoned to deliver a late meal. The corridors were quiet, torches flickering weakly against stone. Halfway there, hands seized me from the shadows, rough and unyielding. I fought, heart hammering, but this body was still too weak. They bound my wrists, dragged me into an unused storeroom, the smell of damp wood filling my lungs. Fear pressed in, sharp and suffocating. I thought of Muruo, of the restaurant, of the fragile future I had begun to believe in. This was how it ended for Muan, wasn't it? Alone, disposable. The door burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Steel flashed, shouts cut short. Through blurred vision, I saw Shen Rui move with lethal precision, his blade an extension of his will. He fought like someone who had done this before too many times. When the last body fell, silence reclaimed the room, broken only by my ragged breathing. He knelt before me, hands steady as he cut the ropes. For the first time, his composure cracked. "You shouldn't have been here alone," he said sharply. As my circulation returned in painful waves, I laughed weakly. "You're right, I managed." I seemed to have poor timing. His gaze softened, just slightly. He helped me to my feet, his grip firm, grounding. In that moment, stripped of titles and distance, I saw something dangerous in his eyes, not coldness, but fear. For me, the realization unsettled me more than the attack itself. We parted before dawn, words unspoken hanging between us like unfinished sentences. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the kitchen shifted. Master Guo no longer interfered openly. Shen Rui's presence became constant, but never explained. Rumors circulated, quiet and poisonous, but none reached me directly. I focused on cooking, on surviving, on pretending my heart didn't race every time Shen Rui appeared at my side. Late one evening, as I stood alone in the kitchen, the hearth glowing low, I felt the weight of everything settle in my chest. This life was no longer just about avoiding a tragic ending. It was about choosing who I became under pressure, who I trusted when the knives came out. Shen Rui watched from the doorway, silent, unreadable. I didn't know what he wanted from me or what I wanted from him. Only that the Yunhai Court had taken notice, and it would not let go easily. As the fire crackled softly, I realized the greatest danger wasn't the enemies I could see. It was the connections forming quietly, in the dark, reshaping the story in ways even fate might not predict. The palace had a way of making every day feel like a storm. Even amid the glittering lanterns and polished floors of the inner royal kitchens, tension hummed in the air like a string pulled taut. Yet, for the first time since I arrived, I felt calm, not reckless, not fearless but present. Every dish I prepared now carried intention, every movement deliberate. I had learned to navigate Master Gu's subtle hostility, anticipate Shen Rui's sharp gaze, and adjust to the rhythm of a kitchen that demanded precision under pressure. But more importantly, I had learned to navigate myself. It began the morning the imperial banquet was announced. A celebration of the Yunhai Court's founding, an event that drew nobles, scholars, and ministers alike. My role was central. I was tasked with designing the main dishes for the emperor himself. I felt the weight of responsibility, but this time, it didn't paralyze me, it invigorated me. The ingredients before me were no longer just elements of survival, they were instruments of expression. I arranged each spice, measured each slice, and seasoned each broth with the care of someone who understood the power of food to connect hearts. Shen Rui appeared at my side, quietly observing, but unlike before, his presence was comforting rather than intimidating. He didn't speak immediately, letting me work, letting me own the space. When he finally did, it was in a low tone that carried unspoken approval. "You've grown beyond what I expected," he said. Not a challenge, not a warning, just acknowledgement. And somehow, that simple recognition steadied me more than hours of preparation. The banquet itself was a whirlwind. Guests moved through the hall, murmuring appreciatively as each dish arrived. The emperor sampled with deliberate care, his eyes flicking toward me with curiosity and, finally, a small, approving smile. It was the first real smile he had granted me, and it was enough to silence the whispers, even the shadow of doubt that had followed me since arrival. My family's name, once tarnished by my predecessor's foolishness, now began to shine with respect and admiration. After the banquet, Shen Rui led me to a quiet balcony overlooking the palace gardens. Lanterns glowed like fireflies in the evening haze. His hands were steady, but there was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before. "You risked a lot to arrive here," he said, voice barely above the wind. "And yet, you've earned more than anyone could have expected." I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the journey sink in. For months, fear had been my constant companion. Now, in this quiet space, hope was just as real. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I reached for his hand, tentatively at first, then with the confidence that came from surviving every obstacle thrown my way. Shen Rui didn't pull away. Instead, he intertwined his fingers with mine, firm man grounding, as if confirming that this bond was no accident. "Muan," he whispered, using the name I now fully inhabited, yet carrying the respect I had fought to earn. "You're no longer who you were, and I." His words faltered, the admission hanging like a candle flame in the night. I squeezed his hand, letting my own feelings speak where words could not. Back at the Mu residence, the atmosphere had changed entirely. Mu Ru's engagement to Les Shen brought joy and stability to a family once teetering on ruin. She confided in me about their plans, her excitement bubbling like a spring that had been dammed for years. Father and mother no longer watched me with suspicion, but with pride, offering guidance instead of judgment. The restaurant, our little experiment in survival, had grown into a thriving hub, drawing visitors not just for food but for the harmony that now seemed to permeate every corner. Even Lindsay, once distant and guarded, approached me with a cautious smile. The past was not forgotten, but it had been acknowledged, and that acknowledgement allowed space for trust to grow. For the first time, I realized that redemption wasn't about erasing mistakes, it was about learning, changing, and daring to be better in the face of what could have destroyed you. The palace became a place of quiet joy rather than constant fear. Shen Rui and I navigated our responsibilities with care, our shared glances and unspoken words forming a bond stronger than the walls around us. We cooked together, laughed quietly in empty corridors, and even argued over the smallest details of preparation, each disagreement a reminder that we were alive, that we were human. Every challenge, every rival, every shadow of the past was now a thread in a tapestry we wove together. And when we finally allowed ourselves a moment of rest, sitting on the balcony with the night breeze brushing our faces, I realized how far we had come. This life, once unchosen and terrifying, had become a canvas. A canvas where love, respect, family, and effort had rewritten a story that could have ended in tragedy. I leaned into Shen Rui, feeling the warmth of certainty for the first time. The palace lights shimmered below, but nothing shone brighter than the quiet happiness we had carved out together. I closed my eyes, letting the events of months wash over me. I was no longer Mu in the spoiled, no longer the careless son or the tormentor from a story I had read. I was Aang, still, but not fully Mu into the man who had faced fear, reshaped destiny, and found love and family in places had never expected. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled without reservation, knowing that the future was ours to write, together. The Yunhai Court, once a place of tension and treachery, had become a world where I could finally breathe, where I could finally belong. And with Shen Rui by my side, I knew one truth above all. Even in a life that begins as a second chance, happiness is possible, and it is well worth every risk we took to reach it.